Hi, this is Jeff Fassbinder with a line, and today we're going to look at the gimbal software for the G3-GH gimbal, as you see it here. We'll also have a brief overview of PID, and this stands for Proportional Integral Derivative, and how it affects the images on your particular multi-copter setup. So why don't we get started? We're going to look at the software on the computer as well as the gimbal itself. So we'll get much tighter on both these so you can see them very close. I'll also note that I have pre-balanced the gimbal with the camera I'm using. I'm using a 12x35 lens, 2.8, and I'm using the G3 camera system, very similar to that of the G4. So we'll go into detail when we're looking at the software, but I also want to show you that I'm actually using the S-Bus, so I'm going to be using the dual operator setup, and the reason for doing this is to enhance the tunability of the roll functionality of the gimbal. So that's just for your added info. If you are going to do your setup, I highly recommend that you go through the process of tuning the roll function, even if you are using just a single user setup. Alright, so let's get started. Alright, the first thing we need to adjust is the PCU hibernation feature. In order to do so, we'll need to open up the APS-M software. And once we get the software open, we'll need to connect up via USB our link to the APS-M. So we'll take off the canopy for doing this. And we'll plug into our APS-M. Okay. Let's power on our unit here. Alright. Now that we have the APS-M powered up, we'll see connected here in green. We're going to go ahead and select the APS-M setup menu. And you'll notice down here at the bottom of the screen it says PCU hibernation. We want to select this to off. And the reason being is so that while we're setting up, the hibernation feature doesn't turn on and basically shut down our multi-copter. So that's why we want to do that. If thereafter we get done with our setup, we can turn that back on as a safety feature. If you ever were to leave your multi-copter on and not power down, after whatever time you set up for hibernation, it'll shut down and therefore protect your battery from over discharge. So it is a good feature for your battery, but in this case, for setting up, we want to select that to off. So we've got that off. Now what we have to do is disconnect that. We're going to go ahead and power down real quick. We'll disconnect the USB port, and we're done with that. With the APS-M, we can put our canopy back on. Doesn't need to be off. We can put that back on. Okay, we'll go ahead and power on. Alright. Now let's open the gimbal software. Now that we've already programmed our hibernation feature, we're going to open up the gimbal software. Again, we'll be utilizing the USB port here, and we'll plug that in to the gimbal. Plug that in. Get my radio here. And let's go ahead and launch the gimbal software. So once we have our gimbal software open and we're looking at the basic gimbal setup menu, we'll notice that there's gimbal mode that you'll see right here, gimbal type, and there's two options. There's the G3 and the G2. In this case, we'll be utilizing the G3. And then depending on what particular camera type we're using, we'll select either the Panasonic or the Canon 5D. In this case, due to the fact that we're using the GH3, we're going to use the GH4, which is a similar camera body style and weight. As far as the sensor response, we recommend you leave that in the default setting here. So when you select your camera type, whatever value comes up there, please leave that in the default setting, and that seems to be working the best. As far as the parameters that you see down here, this is your pan, tilt, and roll, and each of these compose the PIDs for each axis. There are default values to start off with for the GH4, and these are a great starting point when you first get started. Depending on your lens that you're using, these values will vary, and you want to make sure, again, as I mentioned at the intro, that you do balance your gimbal to your camera prior to starting to adjust these parameters. It's imperative that you do that. And before we do any adjustments though, I want to cover a couple of the other screens here. Alright, in the gimbal control setup menu here, the first thing you'll notice on the top left is receiver type. In this case, you'll notice I have Futaba S-Bus selected. There is also Spectrum, DSM2, DSMX, you have JR DMS-S, as well as JR X-Bus, and the Fly Sky system as well. The reason for utilizing the dual operator setup, which is basically using another receiver, is so that we can tune the roll functionality of the gimbal. Even if you are using this gimbal as a single user, we highly recommend that you go ahead and set up the roll functionality with a secondary receiver so that you can tune the PIDs for the roll functionality on your gimbal setup. Further, if you go to the right here, you go to gimbal control mode, you have speed mode for each of pan, tilt, and roll. And as mentioned in your manual, you'll find that we recommend, if you're using dials on your radio to adjust the pan or tilt, to use angular mode. This is due to the fact that those particular dials don't have the precision that a gimbal on your radio is going to have. So angular mode is a much smoother an operation. But if you are using a secondary transmitter and using the gimbals on your radio, we recommend the speed mode for control of your axes on the gimbal. Looking down here, you'll see pan, tilt, and roll. In this area, you can actually check the movement of your particular values in your radio and make sure that they're centering. There's no sub-trim or anything. You can check those out. On the radio. I'll zoom out so you can actually see the camera gimbal functioning here shortly. I just want to make sure that you see this here. Then also here for shot record, this goes on your channel 7 on your radio, and basically depending on what you're doing, if you're firing stills, you can put that on a spring-loaded switch so that it just goes on and off real quick, or you can use a mechanical switch well, on-off for filming. So just depends on how you're using your particular camera setup on that particular menu there. Now we're going to go down to the advanced menu here. And the advanced menu, again, has camera tracking mode setup. You'll see pan, tilt, and roll, lock. You'll see speed down below. There's slow, medium, and fast. That's depending on what type of filming you're doing, on what you actually need as far as pan, tilt, or roll. In the single user mode, you can assign it to follow the gimbal. So if you want it to follow the movement of your multicopter and what it's doing, it'll do that and enable you to focus on pan and tilt in the single operator. The feature here on roll, you can apply it there, but I think it's very useful in the pan mode to follow. So you can use pan again and adjust the speed depending on the flight style that you're doing when you're shooting your particular footage. A great feature again for the single user, back to lock, is the neutral point calibration. The neutral point calibration enables you to adjust the pan, tilt, and roll neutral point. So for instance, you're looking at your OSD and you're a single operator and you have basically pan and tilt available to you. You notice that the horizon seems off maybe a degree or so. You can just go in there on your roll and adjust the roll here. You can just, whichever way it may seem to be off in your OSD, adjust that and then check it and make sure that it's basically horizontal with the horizon, and you'll be good to go. So you can just set that up right there and null that out. Again, that's a great feature for the single operator functionality. So if you're a single operator, this neutral point calibration is a great feature to employ. Alright, let's go back to that first screen and let's get a little closer there. And here's just some values I've been using with the G3-GH gimbal and the GH3 camera with that 12x35 lens. Again, I'm using the 2 red and 1 gray on the dampening, and again that's dependent on your ambient conditions. So if you're in a colder environment, you may go all red, or if you're much hotter, you may add another gray or all gray. Just depends on your setup. But let's look at PIDs and see how it reacts with the actual gimbal itself. Again, P right here. P is the adjustment of speed, or the speed reacting to the movement placed on the gimbal. I, the integral, is the adjustment of time to counter the movement or relocation imposed on the gimbal, on I here. And D, the derivative, is used to measure noise and predict future events. So this, in a way, acts a lot like Expo for P. Alright, now that we've gone through the 3 pages here, which are advanced gimbal setup, gimbal control setup, and then also the basic gimbal setup, we're back at the first screen here. Again, we're going to be tuning the parameters for pan, tilt, and roll, and again that's why we're using the secondary receiver. Hopefully you can see the gimbal here moving. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to purposely turn off all the values here. And you'll notice in the radio, when I give control input, there's no reaction. The default values here are 40, 20, 60, and 80, and that's PID, and then power. But for our purposes right now, just to show you what happens when we make adjustments to these, I'll increase gain here, and I'll put it back to, let's pull this up to right around 40 here. And again, I'm putting control input, but you don't see anything. And the reason being is we need to establish a power value. And so, depending on your camera, you'll need to adjust the amount of power that you allocate to your particular camera gimbal setup. Right now you can see it hunting, and this is with the value of power at 80, and we have the P gain at 41. Well, we don't want this to continue to hunt, so what we're going to do is I'll back this down. Let's see if that improves that first, just looking at the P value. As we decrease the P, we see it hunts even more. Now it's hunting, okay? We don't want that. Let's go the other direction. It's still hunting, okay? It's looking for a reaction to the movement there, and right now there's no counter reaction because we don't have I established. So in order to counter that movement, we need to impose a I value. So I'll bring that up, and that slows it down just a little bit. Let's bring this down about 18 there. And now you see it's bouncing back and forth. Again, this is at a power of 80. We can smooth out this basic future event between the P and I, and this movement in between, almost as if it's a noise. And so what we're going to do in order to smooth that out is we'll impose D. And so add D, and slowly add D. And you'll notice at one point it goes away. Well, this is where you'll need to tune your setup. And what you want is a smooth reaction. So I'm just giving it a little tap. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that when I tap this, when it stops or counters that movement, it's smooth. And so I'm going to keep increasing D. Okay. And I'll adjust the I gain here. And you want it to come back smooth. The movements are fluid movements. You don't want any jerking or stepping, because when you impose pan on your camera, depending on the values that you set up in your PID parameters, this will have an effect on your imagery, and actually have an effect on how focus trim issues could be. So for instance, if the P gain value was too high or the power setting was too high, you could actually induce a vibration, and that would basically give you a soft image. At extreme distances, it would appear to be out of focus. So we don't want that either. So we need to make sure and test that, and I'll go through a brief testing of the tilt, the roll, and the pan, handheld in the multicopter, so you can see that it's smooth in all axes. So right here on the P, I'm going to bring this down just a little bit, this gain, because when it stops, just want to smooth that out just a little bit, so I'm going to drop that back. And when it stops, it's smooth. You want a smooth stop. You don't want it to stop and then kind of hesitate or bounce. If you see any of that, again, make small incremental movements. You can go 5 points, 10 points if you get out of sorts. But you can always go back to the defaults, but just by selecting the reset button here, and then you just select yes, and it'll take you back to the defaults. You can also save your parameters here. In this case, I have a few that I've tried. Go ahead and load this one up. And I'll share those values with you at the end of the video, but basically right now I have 35, 20, 60, and 90 here on the pan function. Alright, tilt, we can do the same thing again. We'll experiment with the values here. And I'll go ahead and just click reset. And then again, pull these down, the tilt, and you can watch the camera. And default was 50 on power, so rather than just come up with arbitrary numbers, I'll go ahead and put this at 50 for testing here. Alright, we have power. Now we need to okay, you see the camera moving up and down the lens there? Let's turn that down. Let's turn that way down. Alright, so I'm going to turn that off for the moment, and I'm going to just start off at 20, and then let's slowly increase I to counter that movement. Alright, we're still getting bounce back. They're fighting each other, and now we'll use the D. Again, here we're correcting the reaction of P to the counter reaction of I, and we're just going to smooth this out with D. So again, we want to get those in harmony there. Let's go ahead and move it down. Also, what you can do when you're doing these adjustments, feel the actual gimbal, and if you notice there's any vibrations, you need to make an adjustment, whether it be your P, I, or D. You're going to need to make adjustments. So let's see how high we can get the gain and still have a smooth operation when we move our lens on the tilt. I'm going to keep going up. Let's go up. Take it to about 40 there. Let's see what happens. See it shake when I let off. Alright. Back it down. right at 35. And let's adjust the eye gain. What was it, about 17 there? Let's take that up. I put that at 48 there just so you can see it, and you can see it's bouncing. So definitely need to back down the eye. So let's back that down. Alright, it's smoothed out right at 20, which is right where we want to be actually. That is actually the default, but it seems to be working very well with this 12 by 35 lens. The D value here, we're at 20, but I want to smooth it out. When it stops, I want to make it a little bit smoother. You can see just a slight bit of hesitation, and so what we'll do is we'll increase the D value here to help smooth that out. And I'm gonna go, I'll go up to 30, check it, and then I'll test it again, test the camera, I'm looking at the lens, and I want that to be smooth. Looks pretty good. I'm gonna see if it can get better though. Take it up another 10 points. Let's see. Alright, and I'm gonna take it up another 10 points. I'm at 50 right now. And when it gets to the end of the movement, when you let off your gimbal on your radio, you get a nice smooth stop. There's no hesitations or subtle variations. And I'm gonna keep going with this. Let's see. See if I'll go up to 60 here. Let's check that up to 60 and see how it reacts to that. A little too slow. It actually kind of keeps moving past the point where I let off. So I'm going to back down that D value. And when I let off, I want to make sure that it stops. So I'm going to stops. It's not sliding through when I let off. So when I increase that D, it again makes a smoother transition. But if it goes too high, it'll cause it to basically kind of overshoot what I had wanted as far as a movement from the gimbal. So again, this smooths out the P and I. So we look at the power here. Again, if I turn up the power, we can adjust that. Again, if for whatever reason our lens doesn't seem to be holding, let's push on it. Let's take this all the way up just to see. Okay, we don't want that. So let's back this off. Again, you want it to be smooth. If you put in the power and again you notice any hesitation, you need to adjust your power setting. Also, if you're moving very rapidly or in windy conditions, you may need to adjust your p-value depending on your particular camera. So you can go in here and make subtle changes to these power values. If you do have any problems, as you saw when I turned up power there and I put pressure on the lens, it just dropped out, the power value being at 100%. Again, the engineers at Align went through great lengths of testing to get us these default PID values, and for the most part they work very well. There is some minor tuning to be done, but let's go ahead and adjust the roll here. And let's turn the P up a little bit here. I'll go up to 10 points, as I mentioned. And let's try that again. The I value, let's go up 10 points. See what it does when we tap it. Let's try that again. There's some very small, almost like hesitation or stepping. So, and that was just going up 10 points. So I'm going to pull back on that I value from the default value. And I'll try it again and see if I can, I still see a small bit of like hesitation there. So I'm going to back it back down to the 20 value. The D value is at 60. Let's pull that back. Let's pull back on our expo, if you will, and see what happens when we do that. Starts to bounce again when we pull back. So we'll add some expo to this. And it still has some hunting. You can feel your gimbal. You can put your hand up here again and feel for vibration, but I can feel a very subtle shake. So I wanted to go back towards the default value. Again, the Align engineers did a lot of testing with various lenses, and that's how they got these default values here for us. I'm going back to the default 60. Let's check out the roll again. Again, we want smooth, fluid movement, nothing where we see any steps or ratchety type movement. We want it to be smooth and fluid. Okay, that's a 60 power. The default's at 80. Let's see, I'll back it down just to take a look. In this case, I'll back it down to about 60 here. And see that just that little bit of movement caused it to rotate there. Well, we don't want that, because what's going to happen in flight is we're going to be moving our multicopter, flying, making adjustments, and if we don't have enough power, it won't have enough power to compensate for this momentum or weight or mass. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll power this back up to the default value close to it, press it, and it seems to be holding pretty well. I'm gonna go again, like I was saying, about 5 points. Default's 80. I'm gonna take it up to about 85, and then I'll try that again. Quick to react, but not so much so where it starts to oscillate. I'm gonna crank it up a little higher to about 91 right now. Let's check a look when it stops. It's pretty good. I'm going to come back down to right about 85 there. All right, let's check it out. Seeing a little bit of vibration there, so I'm gonna actually back down. I'm at 80, the default value. And that seems to be very fluid. Again, when I increase that number, I started seeing a bit of oscillation in the arm. So that's what you want to watch out for and look for when you're doing your setup. Well, the only thing we need to do now is do the shake test. And what I'll do is I'll get over there and I'll move the camera and we'll show the pan, the tilt, and the roll. And basically that's pretty much everything you have to do as far as with pan, tilt, and roll is go through each of these steps after you've balanced out your gimbal system and make minute adjustments from the default values. I highly recommend you use those as benchmark for starting with your particular camera and lens because they're great starting points that again our engineers have worked hard to achieve. If you try and go outside of those parameters, obviously there are various mixes that will work, but within the range of those default values, be it you know, basically about 20 points plus or minus, or where you will adjust. If you're outside of those parameters, most likely you haven't balanced your actual gimbal correctly with your camera system. Let's go ahead and do the tilt, roll, and pan check, and that will get us out and ready for going out to the field and testing our equipment. All right, pull that off. Alright, now we've got some baseline default PID values installed into our gimbal. It does come with the default values, but we went ahead and made just some minor tweaks to the PIDs. And you saw them on screen, and again, you can review those later if you wish. But I do think that those tweaks actually work really well with this particular lens. And if you're using a lighter lens, there's other values that we'll be sharing on the website and on Facebook and other places. So make sure you look for that. There's many people from our engineers and our technicians that are constantly trying new lenses and bodies to develop a platform for you and your particular application. But again, if you want to test out your lens and your camera inside your home, you can do that very simply. All you need to do is have your default values, or your default PIDs, or the PIDs that you've adjusted. Simply lift up your multicopter, test your roll, test the tilt, check the pan. And what you want to do is, when you're doing those movements, not only looking for smoothness, but you're listening to the motors. If you notice there's any vibrations or anything like that where you hear oscillation, it either means that your power's up too high and or the p-value might be too high. So you check those two, just back those down slowly, use small increments, and you'll find that I'm sure you'll hit a sweet spot where you don't feel any vibrations whatsoever. You can also move the gimbal around, just moving it, and you'll be able to sense if there is any vibrations. You can put your hand right up here on the frame and feel that, and feel for any vibrations within the motors on the 3 axes there. Well, I hope this brief overview of the PIDs helped you better understand how it interacts with your gimbal and your camera, and how important it is for the balance of the actual gimbal. If you need any other information, please consult www.align.com.tw, or if you have any questions about setup or parameters, feel free to email me at jeff@alignrcusa.com. My name's Jeff Fassbinder. Thanks for watching.